so much for inviting me to be here. It's wonderful to be with you. What Gideon left out of the story is how we know each other, which was my very first semester or year, I think, at Valpo. He was in my psychology and law undergraduate course. And he was, as many of you know who know him, one of those amazing students that stays with you for many, many, many years throughout your career. And Gideon probably doesn't even realize how brave he helped me be in my very first semester as a baby professor. As I was learning to kind of take risks at my new academic institution and learn how far I could maybe push the envelope. And he was just so amazingly encouraging about that. So thank you, Gideon. And you've continued to help me be brave ever since. So I am especially excited to be here in part because, as you heard, I'm a clinical psychologist and I have the privilege of teaching and working very closely with a mental health counseling program at Valpo, our master's in mental health counseling program. I've been in ever since. I've gotten to serve as the interim program director here and there and have various administrative roles. And so I'm very familiar with your world and have learned so much that I didn't get to learn in my clinical psych training from the counseling world, which has just been incredible, and the different ways we sometimes view things and how we can learn from each other. And I have learned so much from the counseling philosophy and orientation that has actually influenced my writing in really lovely ways. So I love getting to work with counselors and counselor educators. So thank you for having me. And you wanted me to talk a little bit about my work. We'll do that. I'm sure we'll get into that. I just wanted to make sure that Dr. Yu has a chance to kind of say hi too. So I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Gideon and Gretchen, for the invite. Truly looking forward to our time together. I'm excited, yet very nervous, because it's like, why are they inviting me to a writing meeting? I graduated from my PhD program 2 years ago, and I currently teach at Oregon State University. I graduated in 2006 with my master's program, and I did a lot of clinical work and site supervision. It was only in 2014 I decided to do my PhD work. And about 2016, 2018, that was really when writing, I became so aware of the challenges and deficits I had with my writing. So I'm happy to share my story and things that I've learned over the years to kind of overcome that imposter syndrome, the continuous imposter syndrome, to be honest. Looking to our time together, and thank you for the invite. I'm looking forward to just having a conversation, as well as share some of the things that I've learned over the years about writing and about how the skills and the discipline I took to finish my dissertation and work on my writing project.
Great. Well, I'll give you a little bit of background as it kind of relates to, I guess, writing. So when I went to grad school, and I never ever intended to be in academia. I don't know if any of you have gone through that journey, or our journeys have taken crazy paths. I never wanted to be a writer. I never wanted to be a researcher. I was going to work in the prisons and jails, and that's what I was going to do, right? And I loved that work. And I shudder to think of what my relationship with research and writing was even when I started grad school, that, I think it was one of those, I thought, well, I'll convince them that I really like research so I can go to a doctoral program, but really I can't wait to be done with this as soon as they give me that diploma. And somewhere along the way, I learned that, like, wow, this is so interesting. I can ask questions about things I'm observing in the clinical world, in the forensic world, and we can answer those questions. And that I have power and agency to really investigate questions that are important to me and that I'm passionate about, and that I felt there were critical social justice pieces to answering. And so it stopped being so much about research for the sake of research, and really like, no, we need to answer these questions if we're really going to help these people that we're trying to help. And so, my dear mentor in grad school used to joke about how she's like, I'll bring you to the dark side. Just you wait. And it was like, I hate research. I'm not interested in any of that. You know that. And then I got bitten with the bug at some point. And so as I continued on in my training, and my graduate work was in Philadelphia, so not far from where Gretchen is, probably in New Jersey. And then I continued on for my internship and postdoc fellowship in Boston. And so during that time had opportunities to teach, which I also got bitten by that bug and really loved more than I thought I would, and was again getting to do research about things that felt like they really mattered. And so from there, as the position at Valparaiso came open, it was right around when I was thinking about like, I really like teaching and I really like having control over what I get to research. And I love the clinical work. But at that time I had also had my first son. And so just needed some more flexibility and control in my life. And so the academic schedule and opportunities were really a nice fit, and Valpo was a great fit. And so then I found myself as an assistant professor, like not really sure how that happened, because again, it was never my plan. And so what comes with that is a high expectation of continued, writing and productivity. And so I needed to kind of figure out how was I going to meld all these things I was really interested in. I loved teaching. I wanted to stay doing consulting and clinical work of various sorts, but I also needed to be productive in research and writing. And so carving out time for all these different buckets, which I'm sure many of you know how that goes, right? There are lots of different things we do in our work. And so writing and scholarship is just one of those. And so it's trying to figure out how to prioritize those things. And lots of imposter syndrome. I saw lots of nods in response to when Dr. Yu said that. We have all been there. We all continue to be there. I was even just horrified hearing Gideon describe me, not using these terms, but as maybe more mid-career. Like that caused me to pause a bit, because I still see myself as a, naive graduate student who's just starting out in the world. And so, so there's always going to be, I think, some of that imposter stuff. So I'm really excited to talk with you all kind of about that and ways that exchange ideas around how we manage that, because I think there are lots of factors that play into just imposter syndrome in general in our professional work and lives, but also, in our writing specifically. And so, different ways to overcome that. So I started, my lab pretty early on when I got to Valpo. And one of the reasons for that, which I hope is something that we'll talk a lot about in your experiences too, is because I do much better when I work with others. Which sounds sort of strange, right? But I see lots of nods. Like I respond so much better to guilt, right? When I know other people are relying on me getting a part of that writing done or that outline or whatever, than a project I'm doing by myself. And so that is one of my biggest sort of tips for you, is like surround yourself with teams and colleagues and people that balance out your edges. I'm an ideas person. I love vision. I love big ideas. I'm a creative, innovative thinker. I am terrible with details and follow through. Terrible. And so were it not for my teams or co-authors that are better in those areas, we would never get anything done, because I live in the clouds, and so they have to kind of pin me down and say, okay, that's great, but how are we, let's outline this. Let's get this down. Let's divide up who's doing what, and timelines and deadlines and all of those things. So that's, I think, one of the biggest ways that I've been able to be productive. You'll probably very rarely ever see me solo author anything, because it will never get done. So I guess that's just a place to start, is that it was really important for me in the beginning to have a team. And so in my role as an academic, that meant starting a lab from day one and filling it with students at different levels, because their requirements, whether those were master's theses, undergraduate projects, conference presentations, those are finite things that have to get done. And there's nothing worse than looking at a student who's really excited and saying, I'm so sorry I dropped the ball and I didn't get that done. And so I respond well to that, and it makes me get it done. And so building a lab was important for me to make sure I got done what I needed to, because they were relying on me. So I'll pause there. Dr. Yu, you want to jump in? Your journey?
Looks like you muted thing.
Yeah, I have to remind myself I'm muted. So yeah, as I think about my writing, we all have written papers in undergraduate, graduate, master's level, doctoral program. It was kind of like when I was hitting my dissertation project, I was at a point where I was tired, I was out, I had no more energy to do anything. So here I am called to start writing and conceptualizing a big project. Was really difficult for me. So it took me a few months to kind of find my true bearings, kind of, just talking to different doctoral students, talking to different advisors, talking to different mentors, trying to get an idea of how do I jumpstart this project that I needed to do, that it was required for me to graduate. Because for me, I started off after my master's level program teaching in community colleges, four-year universities, and I did clinical supervision. So I already had the privilege of doing counseling, doing clinical supervision, teaching as an adjunct, but I knew I wanted to teach full time. So I knew I had to get a a PhD degree, because that would fulfill kind of the desire for me to teach full time. And I kind of hit this roadblock, and I was at this place of kind of lost, like, oh crap, what do I do now? And so I had to learn, and I had a lot of people that kind of invested in me to kind of show me, okay, this is kind of how you start thinking about conceptualizing and things of that nature. My advisor, but also just people who were outside of OSU that was able to kind of speak into my life, trying to give me ideas of things to look at, things to write. So I'll be more than happy to share that. And I hope that, with Dr. Amanda and my story, we'll be able to kind of cover, the different needs that you may have, of whether you are trying to, write more, or you're in this process of starting and you're like, there's just nothing in me to be able to produce that work in order to graduate with my doctorate.
Yeah, that's a great question. So maybe, just take a minute or so, pop that in the chat where you are. Like, are you more concerned about how do I get started? How do I build a writing career? Or I'm stuck in one project? Kind of give us a sense of what some of your growth edges are, or things that are intimidating to you. I know imposter syndrome is one that I saw come up a lot in the comments that Gideon shared with us in the beginning. So I'll give you guys a second to take that in.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, I'll start maybe talking. So one of the things that I had to learn, even with Gideon's question about building a framework for research agenda, is I had to learn to read, write, research, write. And this was something that I learned from somebody that kind of, during my dissertation process, she said, if you want to be a publisher, if you want to publish articles, or if you want to have a writing agenda, a research agenda, you got to read, research, write, research, write, read, write. And, that was something that I started, kind of got my whole process of dissertation started, my doctoral project started, was I started reading. I didn't know what my research agenda, I didn't know what my research question is. I didn't even know what my research topic was. It was like 1 week was like, gatekeeping sounds good. So I went down a gatekeeping path, and then kind of got to the variables. It's like, no, not sure about that. No, okay. Kind of had to walk back, and then started on another instrument or another idea, and then, kind of pursue that. And then after 6 months, like, I don't think this is going to work. But, the person reminded me, this is all good because you are learning, you are trying to understand your identity as a researcher, your agenda, so that's okay. So I would start by encouraging, if you are like out of ideas, if you are like out of energy, I would say, even if nothing else, just continuously reading, continuously researching, especially if you have already identified a topic that you are like, that will help. But even if you don't, just read and see what flares up, because that could be the start of your research identity. Because for me, I wasn't planning to do professional identity development. I wasn't planning to do online versus on-ground students, but that's kind of what brought, I always tell my doctoral students or advisees or people in my master's program, either you'll find a topic or the topic will find you. You just got to trust the process and let it happen. Sometimes it may take 2 months, sometimes it may take a year. Some of these things you can't rush. It will find you. It's just like, clinical specialties. Eventually, like, why did you end up in grief? Well, it found me. So, yeah.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, sometimes topics do find you, and sometimes people and opportunities find you. Like, you might not have intended to study that particular topic, but you meet a colleague at a conference, you have a great conversation. Conferences. Remember when we used to go to conferences? That was lovely. So, now we meet them over online. That's great. But you meet somebody at a conference, you start having this great conversation. Hey, this is something we're both interested in, and something develops sometimes just because of people you meet that you really want to work with, and you have, energy that makes sense to kind of collaborate. So yeah, I see a lot of you kind of asking things around building a research agenda and what will my path be and all those kinds of things. And I think it's good to be thinking strategically, but I also don't think you need to feel 100% wedded to that. Agendas, start to have different spokes. And when I, think about times that I've had to reflect on my research agenda, or what my research portfolio has been, it starts to become a really great exercise in storytelling. And yeah, look, there was a coherent thread through all of that. Sure there was, when really it was, dependent on people I was working with or stages of my career. And for all of you who've worked with, mentors and advisors, and some of it just depends on the projects they're working on that you get pulled into, and you don't have as much choice around the specific things you're researching. And so the nice thing is you transition into, building your own research agenda, is that you can control more of that. It doesn't have to be just what somebody else is kind of offering to me, or a little bit of a tangent I can do, off of something that they've already been working on. It doesn't have to be in their area of expertise. And I really felt super empowered by that, wow, I can pick what this is going to look like with this path. But I also felt really overwhelmed and scared of that, right? Like, how do I just build this agenda for things I'm going to do? So I guess what my first piece of advice would be there is to just start small. Like, what's a project you're interested in? Maybe it's a subset of your dissertation. I see some of you, Annabelle's like, don't mention my dissertation ever again. I can't. We need some space from each other. And I think that is a very normal feeling. Walk away from that for a while and start something new. And then you'll be surprised, once you've had some space and distance from it, how you are in a better place to kind of come back to it and think about publishing and that kind of thing. But I think what you're feeling, all of you, at the I'm about to defend, I just defended, like, I never want to see this project again. It's totally normal, and know that you can come back to that as well. So don't feel like you have to stay just within that realm. I'd encourage you to find a project or jump onto something that you're excited about, that can kind of renew your energy and, I guess, repair your relationship with research. I needed some repairing after my dissertation too, of like, I just, it's so stressful. You're on such a time clock to get it done. There's a lot of moving parts you can't control, which is frustrating, other people's schedules and that kind of thing too. So I think it's okay to take a little bit of a break from that, so that you can come back to it later on if you decide you can and want to. Gideon saying, rest in peace dissertation. Not forever, just let it be. But yeah, so as you think about developing your own agendas and where you want to go next, again, don't feel like you have to lay out, here's the 10-year plan. And I know that sometimes when you're applying for academic jobs, especially, you do kind of have to lay out, like, here's how I envision this going. And I really think, again, it's telling a good story, and it's being convincing that you have the chops to pull off something like this. I'm not being unreasonable that these are the things I'm going to accomplish in the next year. I'm going to get $1 million grant. I'm going to churn out 3 books and 16 publications, and like, you should want to hire me. They want to see that you have a reasonable plan around those kinds of things. But if that changes, like, there's nobody who's going to say to you 2 years later, now you said in your job application materials, these are the things you were going to do. And it's okay to take, different paths as you're laying that out. They just want to see that you're thoughtful about that. So as you think about your own agendas and what you want for the future, what are you excited about? And what's a small bite-sized chunk you can, just sort of start somewhere and dip your toe in that water, not feeling like I have to accomplish it all right away. So I guess I'd start there. I know that's abstract, and I see you guys want to kind of start getting into nitty gritty, which is great, but I was seeing a lot of you, right, saying, how do I even think about where to go next? And you don't have to have it all figured out. If you would have told me when I took my position now, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, that I would be going down some of these research paths I have, I would have just thought you were out of your mind. Like, no way will I be doing research about that, kind of thing. And so, as Dr. Yu said, sometimes it just finds you.
Yeah, I love the idea of this collaboration. And I think that's the difference between dissertation project, where it's so, you're an island on your own, you kind of have to figure out everything on your own. Postdoc work, can be and needs to be collaborative. I think that's where the richness of ideas, the richness of writing, the richness of research can occur. So I just want to just thank Dr. Manda for even saying that. I think that is just so helpful. Having research team, writing teams can be so helpful postdoc to increase our ability to engage in a scholarly manner. I also appreciate Dr. Amanda's thought about, it may be a small agenda, but it's still an agenda, and I just want to share that, in the interview process, they just want to know you have a plan. They don't want you to be like, I've never thought of that question. Yes, because plans change, our ideas change, our interests may change, but I just appreciate that uh, guidance about, it is so important to have that agenda, to talk about the agenda, you know, uh, and to highlight that during your interview process, and then work collaborative either with the faculty in your university, or reaching out through conferences or through meetings and workshops. I've had opportunities to talk to people at workshops about my presentations and go, hey, that's a really great idea, and go attend their conferences and see how they see or they conceptualize the topic, and then kind of collaborate with them and learn from each other, and then kind of work together in the topic. So yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
just
want to.
go ahead, Gideon. I was just going to give one tiny more note on that, because somehow we've gotten into applying for jobs, which I know you're probably going to rein us in, right? Which is
Way to read the room. That's it.
no, okay, sorry. The last thing I just want to say about that, just Dr. You made me think of something with that. Having been on a lot of search committees since, right? One thing I've definitely learned is exactly what he was just saying, is it's more about showing you are able to shift your mindset out of being that student and my dissertation, right? So if you're talking about your research is really just around your dissertation and my first, and I plan to publish this, and it stops there, we then as a search committee are worried about like, wow, I don't know that they see themselves yet as moving into being an independent researcher role. So I think that's exactly what Dr. Yu was saying, is just sort of have a plan, and it doesn't have to have all the details ironed out, but these are the kinds of things I'm interested in exploring, and this is how I imagine getting there. You don't want to sound like I just, all I'm focused on is publishing my dissertation, because that shows a hiring group committee that you're still in that student mindset. And I know you're still in that student mindset. I'm still in that student mindset a decade later, but I just, need to sound like I have more of a plan than I maybe do. All right, go ahead, Gideon, rein us in.
Yeah, fair. And I think, because I think as I'm listening to both of you, like reflect on like what these experiences have been like in your own journey, like in some ways it is a bit arbitrary to like tease out research, writing, scholarship, agenda setting, because they're all so interconnected and embedded. So, I'll do my darndest to kind of rein it in, but I recognize that like you can't talk about, you can't talk about apples without talking about fruit. Like we have to talk about the category at large as we experience it. But I think the piece I'm wondering about for both of you, like what have you noticed has been some of the biggest shifts in your writing, or even the biggest challenges in your writing, and how have you begun to attend to that? Because I would imagine like within your doc program, your writing was really rough, but then over the course of time, you may become more disciplined, or you may become more like bracketed in like when and how you think about it. But I think I'm wondering about that. Like, what are your growth edges that you're aware of, and how have you begun to address them, if at all? Or maybe this space is for you.
I think in my experience, academic writing, scholarly writing, is full of avoidance behavior, and that's something that Dr. Cass Dyckman said, and I've totally agreed about it. I would love to do a writing workshop right now rather than spend 20 minutes writing 2 paragraphs. So that's why I'm here today. Instead of writing, right, I'm doing a workshop. No, I'm just kidding. But so that's something that I had to learn and I had to acknowledge in my own life. And so what I had to learn to do was to create that discipline of writing daily when I was working on my dissertation project. And now when I'm doing any writing projects, I spend that 20 to 30 minutes each day. Maybe Saturday, Sunday, I may take off, but those are really challenging because once I take off, Monday comes around It's like, what did I write? What was I trying to do, or where was I trying to go with this idea? So when I was in the thick of writing, I learned that if I do 20 to 30 minutes, obviously I had to get support from my spouse, from my kids. I had to figure a way to get out of the house or go upstairs and write, even for 20, 30 minutes, because once I started developing that habit of writing, it kind of changed my life. It kind of gave me the momentum. I'm not saying that the quality was just suddenly there. It may not, but it gave me the rhythm of, okay, this is where I need to go next. This is where I want to go next. This is where I want to go next. You know, and I started, the roadmap started showing up. You know, the prompts started showing up, because as I was researching, I was like, oh, this guy went this route, so I could go this route, or I could go a different route. And that really kind of gave me, you know, the post where I need to go next. And so that was really helpful for me. So now when I write, you know, when I'm in that season of writing, I just tell myself, okay, I need to spend 20 to 30 minutes. And what I did was I did it first thing in the morning when I got into work. Instead of any emails, instead of Facebook, instead of responding to the dean, I just force myself to write 20 to 30 minutes, or it's maybe midday, or after I put the kids to bed, or, you know, kind of have dinner, go somewhere, go to Starbucks and just write for 20 to 30 minutes. That worked for me. I know I've talked to friends who's like, oh, can't do that. So that just didn't work for them. They had writing retreats. They go, you know, for, you know, Friday to Monday, and they write 20 pages, boom, in 4 days. You know, for me it was, you know, that 20 minutes, 20, 30 minutes of just discipline, writing. So obviously I could only write once I had the ideas to research, but once in the middle of it, it was just disciplining myself to writing, not in the sense of researching, writing as in putting words on a paper, on the computer, just to discipline myself. It may not be good work, but at least it started getting the ideas, it started priming the pump. So yeah, that's kind of maybe my first idea I'll share, Gideon.
Yeah, characterizing it as avoidance behavior, I think is excellent. And we all have different ways of doing that. So I even was just thinking about, as you were distinguishing between research and writing right now, like that, ironically, as I was hearing you talk, like that is my avoidance behavior. I go through this process when I need to start writing something where I just hoard literature, right? Like I spend hours, days, whatever, researching every possible article related to the things I need to write about. And I just am like digitally hoarding. And I have noticed over time that that is my avoidance. Like I'm never going to find every single article on point, right? Of course not. And at some point I just need to cut it off and start. But that is ironically, so I guess it's helpful, productive avoidance behavior, but not really. It's just a way to go down rabbit holes that then, this is interesting, and it would be interesting to write about this too, and totally distracts from what the task is. So that was helpful for me to think about that piece of how I start my process often. But I think as I think about my relationship with writing over time, a couple things have changed. So one is my relationship with feedback. And I know this is something that we all struggle with. And in the very beginning, even if I just think about like earliest on in graduate school, I was one of those people who had always been told, you know, I'm a good writer, whatever that means, right? And there are so many implications into what that. And so because of that, I had this false sense of security that like, I don't need to do outlines. I don't need to do drafts. Like what I put down is just the brilliance it's going to be, and that's not going to change. And so take it or leave it, right? And that's terrible writing behavior. Of course, things need iterations and thinking and whatever. But so in the beginning, I can remember in grad school, my mentor was notorious for her like red pen. I mean, she would just murder your outlines, and she always did it in hard copy. And so I'd get this very red draft back, and I'd be so frustrated and annoyed, like, oh, you have got to be kidding me, right? And the level of detail and nuance and like commas and periods, and it was just like, oh, seriously? And that was so overwhelming, right? To get feedback like that. And I probably even resented it in the beginning. And over time, right, that changes. And now on the other end of that, I realized that was a gift. And for her to have spent that much time and that level of detail going through with a fine-tooth comb to make it better, wow, what a gift. And so like I said, my relationship with feedback has changed, and it's the same with reviews. If you've ever submitted a manuscript and gotten really tough reviews, we all have, we all will continue to. Some people handle that better than others. And I can talk a little bit about that process too in my role formerly as an associate editor, just kind of how we deal with that. But that's really hard too. Like, you've submitted this, which many writing projects feel to me like giving birth to another child, right? Like, I've put all this time in and I've given this over to these reviewers, and you're vulnerable. And so when you get back really harsh reviews like that, I am mad, and I have to walk away and like work through my anger management and all that stuff, and then come back to it in a better frame of mind, whatever, a few days later, to really be open to receiving that feedback. Because even if it's harsh, and even if they could have said it in a kinder way, there are still some nuggets in there that can be helpful. And I might disagree with some of it, but it's important for me to think about it. And so when I read a Brene Brown quote recently that has really stayed with me, especially around my writing and feedback that I get on it. Is it more important to me to be right or to get it right? And like, wow, do I repeat that to myself a lot, whether I'm arguing with colleagues about how something should happen, or I've gotten harsh feedback on my writing. It's like stepping back and, why am I doing this piece of writing? What am I trying to put out there? And am I going to be defensive and be more focused on like, I will tell that reviewer, here's all the reasons they are wrong. Or like, let me just see if there's a grain of truth in there that I need to think about to make this manuscript better and to get it right. It isn't about me being right. It's about getting the work right. Because again, if we go back to why we're doing the research to start with, who am I trying to help here? Like, who is this for? Who is the audience? Why am I even doing this project? Is it to prove to reviewer number 2 that you're an idiot and we will have to agree to disagree? No, it's to put the best piece of scholarship out there. Like in my case, for example, to help these incarcerated young kids have people talk to them, in ways that are more effective, to elucidate the trauma so we can better serve them in terms of interventions. That's why I'm doing it, not to be right, not to prove a point to this person I'm now in a academic, pissing contest with, excuse my language, sorry. So I think sometimes we have to get out of our own way with feedback. And it is hard, and I get that, because the first instinct is to be defensive. So that's fine. Be defensive, be mad, don't write back yet. Walk away for a while, and then come back and revisit that feedback. And so to even move back in that process, and I think this relates to some of the imposter syndrome stuff, I've had to get better too about like sending drafts to people I really trust and respect, and telling, first, like before I get to that anonymous reviewer who's going to be really harsh, I want to first go to my sort of trusted circle and say, okay, can you please read this and give it to me straight? I don't want all that, oh, this is so nice. Like, tell me what's wrong with this, because I'd rather hear it from you in this safe space than later send it out and not have thought about a lot of those things. So my relationship with feedback has changed a lot, and it is such a gift, and it is rare that I will ever send something out now without having other people read it to give me feedback, so I can go through these iterations like I should. And the other just sort of quick piece of that is time. My relationship with time and writing has changed over time. And just how I structure it. Like, I used to be one of those people, I probably still am in some ways, but I just don't have the luxury to be anymore, that Dr. E was talking about, where I'd want to go on like writing retreats. And I mentally just like couldn't get myself in a writing frame unless I had a whole day of a cleared calendar that I could just sit and immerse, for 8-9 hours, just be in the writing process. Well, that was a nice luxury when I was a graduate student and I could do that. Now I have 3 kids and a spouse, and I mean, holy hell, we're in a pandemic where everybody's just home all the time. Like, I just don't have that luxury anymore. There's too many tasks and obligations and things I have to do on a day-to-day basis that I can't remember the last time I was able to carve out a writing weekend, as amazing as that is when you can do it. So I've had to learn over time, like Dr. E was saying, to just build in chunks of time into your day. Make that a part of your day. I don't do it every day. Sometimes for me, it's just knowing like, okay, on Fridays, I always try to set aside X amount of time amidst the emails and other catch-up tasks or whatever I'm doing. But one thing that really helped was a colleague taught me the Pomodoro technique. Have any of you heard of that? Okay, Gretchen has, awesome. All right, so the Pomodoro, you can just quickly Google it. There's apps built for it. What it is they often recommend like 20-minute chunks, but so you can pull up an app on your computer, it's a timer and it kind of shuts you out of everything else, which I need because I'm very easily distractible, you know, between emails and social media and whatever. So it's purposely kind of locking you out of a lot of that. And it's a 20-minute chunk that you're just writing for 20 minutes, like whatever it is, just free association, your thoughts, your outlines, or you're writing about research or whatever. And then it beeps and gives you 5-minute breaks. And so they call those the Pomodoros. And so you have, you know, a Pomodoro break, you know, you're going to get that break every 20 minutes. And it may be that in a given day, you can only do one Pomodoro session of 20 minutes. It may be that you set it up that, okay, I have an hour or a little over an hour, so I can fit in 3 quick breaks, and it's in sort of intense, but it feels so good. And knowing like I did it, it might be a terrible draft. It might just be like verbal vomit on the page, but I've gotten something down. And for me, that is the biggest hurdle to overcome. Once I start, it becomes a little easier, but it's just getting started, and you feel so much better when you're done. And if you can do that every day, every other day, the other benefit is maybe some of you have had this experience where you get that great, you know, chunk of a few hours to write, and then you can't come back to it for a week or so. Well, you spend the next chunk, first half of that chunk of time reorienting to like, where did I leave off and what was I writing about and what did I, so you're wasting time. So when you do it in smaller chunks more often, you don't have to go through that reentry process, which I think also helps me be more consistent and productive instead of like, oh yeah, you know, where did I leave off? Where do I need to start? So thinking about the time I spend writing and just accepting begrudgingly, like I don't have these big chunks of time anymore, but I still need to get the writing done on this project can help to chunk it in those ways.
So I just want to kind of talk about the feedback that Dr. Menda was talking about. And for me, I had to work through the fear of feedback. It wasn't that, I mean, yeah, I would be lying say I can get feedback because it's hard for me to get feedback too. But it was just the fear of getting feedback as a writer because I knew I didn't have all the skills or I wasn't a good writer. So anytime I was going to send something out, I was worried that not only would I get lots of red inks, the last sentence on that whole writing would be like, this is a piece of crap. You should quit school now and go do something different. So that fear was always there. It's still there. You know, whenever I'm doing anything that has to do with writing, it's always like, ooh, what happens if somebody calls me out on something that has to do with writing? It would be so embarrassing. It would be so vulnerable. So one of the things I had to learn in my work as a doctoral student was just send it out and find ways to cope with the feedback as part of my learning edge. So whether was it to my dissertation chair where I would send it out and I go, oh, I can't wait for that email because once he sends that email, he's going to be livid at seeing my work and he'll be so embarrassed and here we go again. So that was something that I had to work through because if at seasons of my life when I didn't work through that, I was paralyzed and that impacted my writing, that impacted my research, that impacted my motivation as a doctoral student. So that was something that I had to kind of work through it. And one of the things that I had to learn was what Dr. Menda was saying. Instead of sending it to that person that you are kind of like needs that approval from or that yes, I send it to people who may not know much about the topic, but would give me general feedback. If they can read it and go, I think I know what you're talking about, or this makes a little bit sense, then I know I'm in a good shape. If they come in and they go, I don't even know where you're going with this, then I knew I had a lot more work to do. And whether that's to reverse outline or outlining more or asking myself, in this paragraph, what am I trying to say? You know, so that was something that I had to learn. That was something, that was a practice that I did that was just helpful for me. Before I send it to the subject matter experts for feedback, I always look for a friend or I look for somebody who had no idea about the topic. Can I send this to you? Can you just tell me what made sense? What was difficult for you to understand? Those feedback became helpful for me so that I could continue to polish my work so that when I send it to my advisor or to the person that I'm sending it to, I can have a better stomach or appetite to go, okay, they may still say something about it, but hopefully I've worked through some things to strengthen my writing. So yeah, just something to add to it.
I'll jump in next and just kind of take us to the next spot. So I think one of the things I noticed, Dr. Zelechoski, you had kind of mentioned was talking about working together with folks and just finding those people to collaborate with or to kind of send out potential manuscripts. So I was just wondering if you had any feedback in particular in kind of choosing those individuals. I know you had kind of mentioned about having different strengths and kind of that really being an asset. So I guess just kind of how do you form those kind of writing groups and really kind of seek to make them as productive as possible?
Yeah, great. Yeah. I don't think you need to think about it as one group either, right? So some of it for me has depended on the project itself. So, and so yeah, I'll give you a couple examples. Two of my very dearest friends from graduate school and I, we were all teaching at different institutions. And we used to exchange ideas all the time. Hey, here's an activity we're doing. And we all taught undergraduate psychology and law courses, right? So here's an activity I'm doing. And actually Gideon was a guinea pig without knowing it of some of these activities before we even began this project. And so as we were always exchanging ideas, and then we would be telling colleagues often at conferences, oh, here's something we tried, this mock jury, activity or whatever, this testifying activity. They would say, oh, can you send me that? I want to use that in our class. And so we finally started talking about, hey, let's do some research on whether this actually is effective and students retain more of this information using those activities because they seem to like them. And then all of a sudden we became this writing team where we were doing research and we ended up writing and publishing a book about it a couple years ago. And how fun with two of my best friends that we had like forced conference calls every week. But part of why it worked wasn't just because I was working with two of my dearest friends. It was because our strengths were different, right? Again, I'm in the clouds. I'm the ideas one that wanted to make this a huge, big, ridiculously not feasible project. And their strengths are very different, right? And so one of them is very detail oriented and the other is just kind of a butt kicker. She'd be like, you said you were going to do this and you didn't. And I needed that. And so we actually, over the course of our work together, realized we also embodied the human stress response, like fight, flight, and freeze. I was definitely the fighter. One of the others was freeze and one of the others was flight. And so you just learn your strengths and ways that you're working together. But it also had to be sort of trusting that we could be vulnerable to say, hey, I just don't like that idea, or that's not working, or the way we tried this isn't working. And so that was kind of one example. It was just a natural social group where we were doing similar work and thought, let's turn this into some scholarship because others seem like they'd be interested in that. For other teams, it's been, we are just working on a similar study. So for right now, for example, I'm collaborating with a colleague in Canada. We both did studies. We actually didn't even really know each other well, but on social media saw that we were both doing similar studies on the impact of COVID-19 on families, on children and parents, and what their stress is like. And so we kind of found each other and said, hey, let's figure out some ways to disseminate this, in ways that can really help people in real time. So all of a sudden now we're collaborating with some of my students and some of her students. And so that was something that made sense topically to come together. Most of my collaborations, to be honest though, are with my students. So I'll have a grad student really interested in this project. And so we'll kind of come together and say, okay, let's figure out how to make that work. And, like I said, it really helps me to have students keeping me honest and on task to be able to advance their development in terms of research and scholarship. So lots of different teams. Sometimes your former mentors will pull you into things knowing that that's an interest you have or a strength you have. But I think it's before you agree to these things, it's making sure that we're on the same page about our goals, because if you have very different goals, like you might have somebody who's, right about to or applying for tenure. And so they're strategically and professionally need something different out of this project that this other person who's in a totally different time in their career, so really being honest about, hey, here are my goals for this. Here's what I'd like to come out of this. Here's the actual, probably the biggest negotiation is how much time you can each give to it. And that's tough. We overpromise, or I am definitely guilty of thinking that I have 75 hours in the day instead of 24. And so I agree, if I've agreed to be on several projects like this, can I really give the time? And let's be honest with each other about, all right, this is where this is in my priority list. How about for you? How much time can we each give to it? And what strengths and weaknesses do we each bring to it? I need to be honest about what my limitations are. So yeah, that's just some initial thoughts about that. Dr. Yu, have you had good group dynamics, teams? How's that worked for you?
I have not. I have not. I usually have talked about it, done lots of conversations and conferences, but my takeaway from this is I need to start working hard, building teams for research and writing. I've talked about it, I've think about it, but that's an action step I need to do. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
Some of it's easier than other. Like sometimes there are times I regret it, right? Like I get in a team and it's like, oh my gosh, I could be doing this so much faster on my own, or it's frustrating if we don't realize until pretty far in we actually have different working styles, and so, or expectations or whatever. So sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Some of it is also by necessity, I can tell you. I am at a smaller teaching-oriented institution. I do not have the infrastructure or resources to be necessarily applying or securing some major grants. I don't have a lot of the administrative support that some of my colleagues in bigger Research One institutions do. So there are times strategically for me that it's like, that's great. Like this makes sense for me to join in with this because they bring things that I don't have, and vice versa. Sometimes what I bring to the table is my access to populations that are really difficult for others to get access to. Like juvenile justice research is really hard. There's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy. Well, the benefit I have of working in a smaller community in town is we all know each other. And so my juvenile justice facility has been wonderful in partnering with me over the years and saying, sure, yeah, let's do this. How do you need us to support you? Whereas some of my colleagues in bigger cities are like, I got to get through 8 layers of government bureaucracy before they'll even let me propose this project. So there's just sometimes it's strategic to be in teams too, and you bring different things to the table. So it's kind of knowing what you need and what you bring, and that can be a good reason to join too.
It makes me think too that, Edward, you were like, not necessarily working in teams at the moment, but it makes me think too that so much of what you both are pointing to is really grounded in your own context. Like, Amanda, like you've been at Valpo for a number of years, so you have a sense of the community and context for you to really write and collaborate in. And I don't think this is like big news, but Edward, like you have just moved, and so there's this like getting familiar to like the context, the neighborhood, the community, to get a sense of even like the university culture of like how can I like really carve out a space for potential writing collaborations. I don't want you to let you go. I don't want to let you go on that, Edward, because there's a newness to like where life is right now.
Well, also thinking about, I was wanting to do the disability, the grief conference this year, and obviously COVID-19 got canceled. I was hoping going there would be able to help me meet people to collaborate and to work on research projects or writing projects at least. And with COVID-19, it was like, okay, well, maybe next year or whenever the next conference is. So yeah, good point, Gideon. I think ecosystems is so important.
Yes, and time, again, this false sense that we have that people are doing these things so quickly. Like Gideon's absolutely right. It has taken me 10 years to develop these relationships, right? None of these projects happened in my first 3 years. I was just like trying to find the bathroom in my building for the whole first year I was getting settled, right? So absolutely it takes time. And some of it was also, like I was starting to say, necessity. Like I did come into my position with, again, being in the clouds around like what I could accomplish in my setting. And it took me a couple of years to learn the limitations of our infrastructure and what I could have access to and didn't. And so that, okay, if I want to do some of these bigger projects, these are some of the kinds of people and institutions I'll need to partner with. It took time for me to orient and learn what I could accomplish on my own versus couldn't, and when teams might be necessary. But any of these collaborations have taken years. Like the project with my 2 dear friends from grad school I mentioned, I mean, that was a 5-year thing from the first conversation we had over coffee at a conference, like, hey, maybe we should do something with this, to when the book was finally published. So none of this stuff, and I think, again, in grad school, you're forced to move on a quicker timeline, right? Mm-hmm. So we pick these maybe smaller, more bite-sized, manageable projects because we want to get them done so we can finish school. And so I don't know that that's a great realistic picture of once you get out and leave that, of how long stuff takes. Even just writing, for any of you who've submitted to a journal, from the time you submit the first draft to the time when it finally gets published could be 2 years if you're lucky, right? Between how long it takes the reviewers to give things back and then revisions and then whatever, or if it gets rejected and you're trying for another journal. I mean, and then they give you revisions, and it's not like the next day you can do them all. Like sometimes it'll take me 6 or 7 months to do the revisions before I resubmit. And so I think it's really important to remind ourselves about the real reality of time, and that none of this stuff happens that fast, because you're also living life and have a bunch of other things on your plate too. And that's okay. That's why we talk about careers, right? Over the course of my career, these are things I will accomplish.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, just because I saw Annabelle's kind of comment on there, so just if there was anything else that you guys wanted to speak to, because she had said, how do you manage multiple projects in terms of allocating time and effort? And I guess with that also too, I would just wonder, do you have any kind of pragmatic tools that you really find helpful, either just like with those multiple projects, kind of keeping order to that, or even in the collaboration with folks?
Dr. Yu, you want to go first?
Trying to think, that's a really good question. For me, you know, using technology to manage schedule and expectations. So like for me, when I'm working on multiple projects with different people, whether it's writing, having a Google Docs of just some journal log or activity log, so that we all know what we are doing, how we are collaborating, how we are working together, what our needs are, what are the needs of the project. For me, that sometimes is very helpful. That way, it's not like we're waiting for the third month to kind of, oh, hey, here's the need. And then it's like, oh, wow, you know, if somebody could have shared that earlier, we all could have kind of put the energy to make sure that that need was met at early on. So for me, I always like to think about what technology can I use in addition to just the writing to help work on the multiple projects at the same time. So, yeah.
Yeah, technology is great. I sort of laughed when I first saw your question, Annabelle, because I was thinking there's the answer I'd give, and then there's the answer my husband would probably give, right? Which is, oh, she doesn't manage them at all. She doesn't know how to say no, and it is ridiculous what she thinks she can accomplish in a set period of time. So I feel it important to honor that maybe the way I view it is not grounded in reality sometimes either. And part of the reason is because I really get excited and energized about so many things in the world. I think we're all guilty of this as these like bleeding heart mental health professionals, right? Like I want to do all the things for all the people, and I want to study all the questions, and there's so many cool projects and collaborations and so many amazing students with ideas and energy that I want to support. And so I have got to learn, and it's been a growing edge for me my whole career, how to say no to things. And so how I manage multiple projects is honestly, I just have to keep reprioritizing. And that is in my like weekly to-do list. Like I'll show you, for example, I have my little like Post-it because I'm old school and do Post-its. Dr. Yu with his technology, let me tell you. No, I'm just kidding.
If it's not on my phone, it doesn't count.
Right. So exactly. So I'm often literally redoing that Post-it each week. Like, okay, this is how I have to shuffle things. And some of that's because of deadlines, which again, deadlines are very good for me. As much as I hate them, things like submitting to a conference and knowing that that clock is ticking backwards. A journal that has told me, okay, your revisions have to be submitted by such and such if you want to have the same reviewer, you know, whatever. So deadlines are very good. Again, students' deadlines help me, and then I work backwards from that. So depending on some of those deadlines, I'm always shifting things around. But I have, let me tell you, in COVID, in our current climate, I have had to triage like I have never had to before in my career. And I'm sure many of you have been in this situation too, because I have 3 young children who were home and we were e-learning and all the stuff. And my husband works from home, you know, and so it was like, it's been exhausting, as I know it probably has for all of you, but it feels like on an hour-to-hour basis, I'm triaging. What is the thing I have to get done right now? Right now, okay? Is it I have to help the kid with this homework, I have to do this and respond to this email. So a lot of these projects have just had to pause. Like we're just on a timeout for a while. And that's just the reality of the situation. And so I want to remind everybody, myself included, not to feel guilt around that. Like we are in a pandemic, for crying out loud, right? And so it is okay to not be able to accomplish all of the things you normally would, because we're also dealing with just, right, the mental health and stress and exhaustion of that, while we are trying to keep our loved ones healthy and safe and make all the decisions that we have to on an hour-to-hour basis. So my management of a lot of my projects has honestly, in the last few months, had to be pause, all of these would be nice to accomplish at some point, but if they are not mission critical right now because somebody's graduation is depending on this, somebody's whatever, moving forward with a decision about this policy we have to change, whatever, I've just had to triage. And I think there's some measure of that we're doing all the time, right? But definitely more so right now. And so I just encourage you to not be afraid to say no to things that do not feel mission critical. And I'll give you one little tip that a mentor shared with me years ago about how to do that. Because I know where you are too, which is when you're coming out of grad school, finishing up, or early in your career, it's like everything sounds so exciting. And you're in that grad student mentality of, I may never get this opportunity again. Somebody's offering me this. And I get that. And so that's that grad mentality that like, oh my gosh, just somebody even asking me to do this is so wonderful and amazing. And I want to say yes to all the things, because what if this is a once in a lifetime? They're not once in a lifetime. Okay. Just know that. I can assure you that most of them are not. But what she taught me was, if somebody's asking you to do this thing, whatever it is, new project, join me on this committee, present at this conference, give this talk, whatever. And it was next week, because most of the time they're asking you and it's months away, right? So it was next week. And it would mean, in order to be prepared to do that, you would have to drop everything else on your plate this week. You'd have to cancel all the meetings. You'd have to set everything else aside to do this next week. Is it important enough to you that you would say yes? Most of the time it's probably a no, right? But if your answer is no, then say no, because guess what? In 6 months, that's going to be where you're at, because you're going to think you're going to work on it. Oh, I've got 6 months to develop this proposal, project, whatever. You think you're going to, but in most cases you're not. And you're going to be in that position where, oh shoot, I have to give that talk next week. Now I have to spend the next 5 days just doing that to get ready. And so that's really helped me to kind of check myself when people are asking me to do things and be very strategic about what I say yes to, around, would I do this next week? Would I drop everything else to do this next week? And if the answer is no, it's not going to be important enough to me in 6 months either. And especially at this time where we have to triage what's most important, prioritize, because there's going to keep being these unknowns, especially right now in our current climate. Fires we're going to have to put out, or we're just going to have to cut off even more from our list. And it sucks to say no to people. I get that. But it's also worse to say yes and then be the one dropping the ball, right? And feeling like I have to keep apologizing. I have to keep asking for extensions. We don't want to be that person either, which sometimes we have to be. But, you know, we want to avoid that if we can. And so I'd rather you say no to me outright, like I just can't do this right now, than have me have to chase you down over the next 3 months to say, hey, where is that? I'm really waiting on that. Are you still able to do that? You know, so a lot of it's being honest. And in my case, having a husband who will call me out and say, really, what hours are you fitting that into? I know you're excited. So say thank you for the opportunity, but I cannot do that right now. So.
Dr. Mehta, thank you for your honesty and vulnerability. You know, as you're talking, I just appreciate your honesty. And for me, I think that work-life balance is so important for me at this point. I have 2 young kids. I have a spouse. You know, I have family. I have parents who are growing old. And I've just come to this point of my career where I want to do good work, but I cannot do all good work. And, you know, if somebody's going to get promoted because I didn't do 5 journals or whatever, it's like, hey, go for it. Because for me, my kids are not getting younger, you know, and now they still think I'm cute and adorable. One day they will not. So I have to be very mindful of those times. And maybe it's a privilege that I just have to acknowledge as, you know, as I don't know. I want to also be mindful of that. But, you know, I've heard from mentors who say, don't wait till you retire to do all this fun stuff. Because by that time, your kids, your spouse, or your parents may no longer be there, or may not want to be there because you gave them up during your prime years as a career person or as an educator or whatever. So I really appreciate you saying that, because for me, you know, with multiple projects, and I want to acknowledge some of us don't have that choice. You know, some days I have other things that I have to do that may not be writing or research. And I just have to at a point say, you know, it's Friday, I'll respond to you on Monday. And unless you really need an answer, the answer is no. So if you want a yes, wait till Monday.
Yeah.
So, and it's being able to acknowledge that, because I think sometimes that's kind of the mindset that higher ed has. It's like you give your whole self to the university or the institution, And then what are we giving up? The kids and the spouse who then resent the higher institution for our sacrifice that, you know,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Oh, absolutely. And I think related to that, it'll be different for all of us what that looks like. I also find myself over time resenting the term work-life balance, right? Like we ever really achieve balance. It's more like, at least for me, this management equation. Like today it's tipped more toward work and tomorrow more you know, whatever, but striving for balance feels like this unattainable thing for me anyway. And so I've tried to even just reframe my relationship with that over the years. But for me, I am a workaholic, right? Like that was very clear to me in grad school. Like I could work all day long, every day, and you know, whatever. And that's a problem. And so for me, family, kids has forced me out of that in a good way, because what I have found is even though I might be like, oh, I could just use another few hours and I'm getting interrupted and whatever, it helps my writing, it helps my thinking to walk away from it, right? And go for a walk with my kids. And that's when I'll get that idea like, oh, you know what? I had some space and clarity. Like I haven't thought about this piece of it or, you know, whatever. So whatever it is for you, if it's hobbies, if it's, you know, whatever, exercise, family, friends, have these things that force you to separate from your work. And I say force because for me, I need to be forced. I'd work all the time if you let me. And so it has helped me to have these, you know, living beings depend on me to do things for them and, you know, to get me away, which also just makes me better at my job, to be honest. Although I will tell you, Dr. Yu, as you said, you know, they still like you right now. Man, that goes away faster than I thought. My 10-year-old through remote learning at one point was like, I don't know how you teach college students, Mom, because you're a terrible 4th grade teacher. And I was like, yeah, you know, you're not wrong, buddy. So enjoy it while they still like you, Dr. Yu.
oh, I don't know about that. He's like, go away. You know, I got class now. It's like, got it.
I love that. I love referring to kids as living beings. That's it. Yeah. So part of what we want to do here, given it's just to, in some ways take a couple downbeats, because given what both Dr. Zelechoski and you have shared, I mean, there's a lot here related to writing that I think very richly, like they've made more complex. It's not just writing skills, but it's all of these other factors around writing. So we just want to take a couple downbeats here and really open the floor to y'all. So in some ways, liberate you from the chat box and open the floor to get a sense of, you know, inviting you into the conversation to see how this is landing with you and what reflections or further questions you're sitting with.
And any questions we haven't addressed, like feel free, please, or tips you want or exchange with each other, ideas that work. Otherwise, I'll just start showing home videos of my living rooms. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead, Allison.
So I'm super early in my career, being just a second-year doctoral student. So it really resonated with me when you said, you know, we just have to get stuff done. So writing does feel really intense. And like you described, it's very time-oriented. There's just, we don't have the luxury with due dates and classes and things like that. So it is kind of hard to conceptualize a time when it's going to be this maybe open-ended, extended timeline. And so as I'm just listening, I'm curious, you both have said, I've had to learn to cope with imposter syndrome and cope with maybe feedback that I wasn't expecting, or maybe kind of hurts my feelings a little bit. And so I guess if there was a way you could describe a little bit more transparently, like how you did that, it's wonderful to know that like you learned how to do it, but I'm kind of in the seat of, okay, I'd love to learn how to do that, but I have no clue how to do that. And I really appreciate the idea of seeking support from others. And but I just didn't know like if there was any other tangible, or maybe you might just say, listen, like it's another process. You just have to ride the wave and you'll figure it out. But if maybe somebody early on in your career gave you some, or anybody, because many of you in the session today are just further along in your career trajectory than I am.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess for me, and I would love for you to be sharing with each other, because I think that's important too, for you to see like, I'm not alone in this, and you're so not alone in this, Allison. It is still hard for me. But like tangibly, I mean, I had a grant reviewed a few years ago, like a major grant, and the feedback, I wish I used to know the exact verbiage, because that's how much it stayed with me in the wee hours, but it was just basically boiled down to like, you are a terrible researcher and probably a terrible person, and why would you want to do this project? And it was like, God, like, you are attacking not my writing, but it just felt so personal as opposed to constructive and like, here are the things wrong with the project. They didn't say I was a terrible person, but of course that was how I turned it around in my mind and was like, they just think I'm horrible at everything. And so I went down that, downward spiral for a while. But when I could step away from that, like, okay, remove that comment. I disagree with the way this person said it. Their feedback was actually spot on and really like changed the project, and was like, they're right. I hadn't thought about these things. This is a really important ethical concern I missed. Like, just, it was hard to take, but it was actually really helpful. If I could separate out the sort of person and harshness to it. Yeah, emotion, exactly. And just like, all right, but what is the grain of truth there? And I have tried to learn that in many ways. Like, I'll give you another example. My course evaluations, and for many of you who will be teaching, those are really important in depending on the kind of institution you're in, just as much as your research and other things. And so this spring, was hard. I was going through the same thing all of my students were as we shifted to online, and my teaching evaluations, which I fully anticipated, were not good. And, Gideon can hopefully attest, I'm like usually a pretty decent teacher. And so that was hard to hear, but I had to step away and like, because initially my response was, that's not fair. I was going through the same thing there were. And like, there's only so much I can do as I'm frantically trying to convert things. And I did all of that and then slept on it and went back and read them the next day. And it was like, you know what is through these words? That they were just struggling and frustrated, and I couldn't meet their needs in the way they needed me to. And I own that, because I couldn't meet my own family's needs either in the ways they needed to. And so I just had to own, like, I couldn't be all the things for all the people, and there are balls I'm going to drop. But the feedback in that is what I needed to make peace with. I could be mad and frustrated on day one, and let yourself do that. You're human, of course. But I needed to come back to it. That's the important part that I think sometimes we don't do, because we get frustrated and hurt. We take it personally, and then we walk away and we don't go back and revisit it because it's too hard, or like, I don't want to open that up again, whatever, I'm defensive. But I have forced myself to come back to it. And I learned a lot from those evaluations that I really hope will help me this fall when I am making the same switches, right? Or if this happens again in the same way, I heard how I needed to better meet their needs. And that's important for me to take that feedback and not just dismiss it that like, well, they didn't. So I think no matter in what capacity you're receiving feedback, have the human response, be mad, have your grown-up tantrum. It's okay. We're human. But don't let yourself not come back to it. Take the space you need and then come back and just read through the lines and figure out like what grains of truth are in here and what's underneath what this person is saying. Because again, I will tell you, the fact that they took the time to give me feedback was a gift, as hard as it was to hear. And I learned a lot from it. And so, hopefully that carries me forward. And so no matter how you're receiving the feedback, just walk away, be mad, but come back to it when you can, would be my advice.
I'm just going to repeat what everybody has said so far. Allison, I think you said it well. You will find your own style or your own way of processing that feedback or the comments that you received. So I think that is so important piece of it, is finding your own style of how do I work through this. And then I would just kind of echo what Dr. Mendes said as, feel the human emotions. For me, I cried. I just went into my closet and cried and cried and cried and says, this is never going to be over. This is, I might as well become a, XYZ, because there's no way I'm ever going to get my doctorate. Right? And so I responded that way, and then I got angry. I got angry at myself. I got angry at everybody else because that's a human response that I had. And then the next thing is giving myself some space to cool off, to clear my mind, to clear my energy. That way that, what Dr. Menda is saying, when I come back and read the feedback, hopefully I'm looking for the nuggets of truth. I'm learning from the person that gave me that feedback. This is where I may need to go with my project. This is the changes I need to make. Or sometimes even reaching out to the person. If it's an anonymous reviewer, obviously that's not possible. But sometimes if it was like, somebody that wrote back on my writing or something of that nature, and I could ask for feedback. Can I sit down for you for 10 minutes and just pick your brain even more and ask for clarification so that I can do better in my work based on your feedback? So yeah, thank you. I think that was a good question.
I'll just say one more quick thing. I see some other great questions coming too, about that. Having been an editor for a journal and seeing on the back end what happens there, people who give feedback that harshly, like there's, as you have probably guessed, there's a lot of their own stuff happening there. And so sometimes I get frustrated when the editor doesn't do their job, or the associate editors, or whoever is facilitating that process, because I had that power to go back to reviewers and say, listen, there are better ways to say this. Could you please do this in a more constructive, there's no need to get personal and attacking. And that is obviously more about that person's ego, arrogance, whatever. So just know that it's also okay when you read it, if you're like, are you kidding me? Like, was this necessary? And recognizing there's something going on for that person that they had to deliver it that way, because there's just really no excuse for that. Even if you vehemently disagree, even if you think it's a terrible project, there are ways to say that constructively. And so there will be times that you have to push that imposter stuff aside and say, like, to yourself, they are wrong. Like, it is okay for me to also disagree with what they're saying. There is value to this project, or there are strategic reasons I did the methodology that way, and I can defend that. I would just say, be sure you're having people that, again, that you trust and feel comfortable with, read your responses so that yours don't come across as defensive either, but more like, this is a reasonable response and we will agree to disagree, but here's why I did this in the writing the way I did, or whatever. It's okay to disagree. Sometimes we are right, believe it or not. And sometimes there are ways to communicate that. So I don't want you to take away from this either, that like all the feedback you get, you have to find the grains of truth and agree with it and that it's right. Not necessarily. It's just that I want you to be thoughtful and calm when you're coming to those conclusions, rather than our emotional response or instincts at the beginning.
So one of the questions has to do with writers who may feel like their English is not, their writing skills, it may not be the best. And for me, I knew that was a reality that was real for me, was very harsh for me. So two things that I did was, one, before I sent it in to somebody that had power or the feedback was really important, I would send it to people who was just able to help me polish either my sentence structure or my grammar or things of that nature, just to continuously give myself that kind of feedback. I had to give myself the grace to say, this may only take 3 days for some students, but for me, it may take 2 weeks. And just learning to be okay with that, learning to be okay with finishing my assignments 2 weeks before it's due so that I could send it for further review or further help or clarification, so that the work that I turn in 2 weeks later could be better, because I gave myself that time and just the acknowledgement that this is not my strength and I need help, and continuously to work at it and continuously to grow from it. But so that was just something that I had to learn. And it was hard, because sometimes either your professors, don't give you feedback, or they just, give you feedback, but it's like, oh, I can change some of this. This is a learning process. This is my growing age. So how do I do this in a way where I can support myself, but I also can use the support, whether it's in a university setting or in my in an environment where I can find people that can help me in my writing, especially for me, since I don't have the strength or the knowledge as an English writer or as an English learner. So
yeah, and I don't know if this is helpful, because I am not bilingual. I wish I was. But it's something that even just helps me writing in English as my first language, which is to speak stuff. So sometimes, and I've encouraged a lot of students to do this, that instead of sitting down to write, talk it out and record yourself. Tell me the story. Write the paper by just like we're talking. Tell me what you want to talk to me about. Tell me, what was your study about? What did you find? How did you do it? Just speak it and record yourself. And then you go back and transcribe that. And then you can start to finesse the grammar and the English conversion and the punctuation and all that stuff. But no matter where you use recording, some people like to do it that way on the front end, where you tell the story, record it, and then type. If you don't like it that way and you're somebody who does better writing it out first, I would always tell you, which I tell students to do all the time, record yourself then reading the paper. Write your draft and then read it out loud, speak it, because it helps you pick up on those things you didn't notice when you were writing that don't make sense. Because I was so focused on the words and the construction of the sentence that I lost that, wow, this sentence ended up being 10 lines long and I didn't even realize that. But when I'm speaking it, I'm recognizing like that is a very long, confusing sentence. So don't be afraid to use both writing and recording, because I think it can be really helpful. And the way I use it is if I'm trying to write, you guys know, you read journal articles, they're so boring. They're so boring and like wordy and academic. And the best pieces of writing I have read are when people, I feel like they're telling me the story, like tell me the story of this project. And I have heard people do that verbally in these amazing ways where it's like, okay, so then we gathered this group. Like imagine you doing your dissertation right now. If I told you to do like a dramatic improv performance of your dissertation defense, tell me the story. I'm going to be hanging on every word. But if you read me your dissertation defense draft, it's like, we know it's all the, and then participants included, that's how we write. But if we could actually write the way we get jazzed and energized to tell the story of the projects we're doing, imagine how much more interesting that would be. So I encourage a lot of people to like, don't be so married to how we talk about things, or if you do, find ways to weave in stories. That's what motivates me to finish writing projects, is I will think about John Smith, you know, the kid that I evaluated for this research that I interviewed, and like his face is the one, like I want to tell him what I found because I talked to him and many of his peers in this facility. So keep in mind like who you did this for and tell the stories. Again, using all of our research conventions, but just so again, the language conversion piece, but also just writing in a more interesting way. Try to write it by telling the story the way you would to your friends when they say like, what have you been spending the last few years doing? You talk about it in a different way than you write about it. And why is that, right? So just try to bring those things together more, I think.
I saw we had kind of one last question. Maybe we'll do a lightning round because I know that we're kind of coming up on the close of our time. But maybe just briefly in a sentence, Melissa had asked kind of a ballpark timeline. So I think kind of what I'm looking at is basically, do you have like a kind of average timeline of how long you would say it kind of takes to kind of create a journal, like a publishable journal article? And do you really just kind of let that flow, or do you really have like a clear process of kind of what that looks like from start to finish? So I'll throw it out to either of you who wants to kind of tackle that.
I'll start by saying I don't do well with deadlines with writing. I prefer to be more organic. I do the discipline part, what I need to do, but I'll let the flowers bloom when it blooms. So I've just kind of been the one where when I did deadline for my dissertation, I cried more because it was like, oh, it was supposed to be due 2 weeks ago, but it's like, hey, guess what? It's not there. So I just had to keep working at it instead of like punishing myself. Other things I like to do deadlines, but not writing.
That's so interesting. I'm hearing you say that and I'm thinking, Dr. Yu, like my flowers would die. They would die a fast death if I just wanted to let them bloom. Like there would be no garden. Okay. So, and I think what Gideon just wrote too is so much more, yeah, it depends on so many things. And so sometimes I am strategic about like, there's a manuscript I submitted fairly recently, which was for an invited manuscript for a special issue, right? And that was strategic. Like this is a paper I have been wanting to write and get these results out for several years now. And once I saw that it was a special issue on that topic, it was like, yep, this is what's going to force me to get it done. I am applying because there is a deadline and it will force my students and me to actually get this paper written. Otherwise, those seeds will never be planted for blooming. And so, you know, it was like, and just one of those things that then weighed on me, like, here's a project I worked really hard to gather this data. It's just sitting there waiting to be written, and everything else will become a priority over it because I don't have the ability to be organic or prioritize it anyway, because every other fire starts to take precedence. So for me, the timeline depends on what the project is, or I'll purposely submit for a conference knowing that'll force me to work backwards to meet that deadline. So I have to have deadlines. Now, what the timeline looks like will just depend on that. But if it's, let's say there weren't deadlines, man, I mean, I just think I can't even begin to answer that, right? Because without deadlines, I am worthless. So it'll sit there forever languishing. But from publication, like from starting to write to publication for me, I'd say probably on average is like 2 years often. Between when you start writing for whatever, 6-7 months, something like that, in a really intentional, focused way, from when you first submit to when you get reviews a few months later, ideally if the journal moves things quickly, from when you submit revisions several months later, from then another revision. So I think from start to finish, for me, it's on average about 2 years.
Thank you. So with that, and speaking about deadlines, it seems like we've almost kind of come to the end of our time together. So I'll just ask each of you if you have any kind of just closing thoughts or remarks that you'd like to share just to kind of close this out.
Dr. Yu, you want to go ahead? You want me to...
I'll let you go. I'm trying to formulate good question.
No problem. I guess my final tip, and then I'll give a closing thought, would be to break things up in chunks. Writing is a big, daunting, like, I have to write this manuscript, I have to write my dissertation proposal, whatever it might be. Break it into small pieces. Like, this week I'm going to focus on writing the introduction. Next week I'm going to focus on analyzing data. Like, create the list of all the things to be done and then break it up. And that's just so much more psychologically manageable than, I am sitting to write my dissertation today. Like, no way, right? Because then you also have accomplishable milestones, which is important to feel like you're checking things off. So break it into small chunks would be my last bit of advice. And just closing thoughts, like, we are all feeling that imposter syndrome always with writing, right? And some of that is because people look to us to be scholars and know stuff. So if you can kind of get out of your own way, that's my biggest growing edge. Keep getting out of my own way and just sitting down and doing it, and having faith that you have been trained well, that there are people to help support you in this. You're not expected to know how to do all of the steps by yourself. So work with mentors who bring in, and colleagues and friends and peers who bring different strengths to that, and go to them for different things. Can you help me with the methods part? Can you help me with the stats? Can you help me, whatever? And just know that you don't have to do this on your own. And I would just encourage you to stay focused on that. Like, this is about getting it right. And so there's going to be hits along the way, and I'll fail along the way, and that's okay. It's how we put good work out there. So keep at it. Like, just keep showing up and get out of your own way.
Yeah, really good. Yeah. So for me, I think finding your style is really important. And I just kind of want to go back to that as a closing statement, is really just thinking about what environment do I need? What habits do I need? What discipline do I need to be able to write, to be able to put myself in a place where I am writing often? You know, when I talk to mentors who publish a lot, they always tell me they have learned the discipline, the art, and their style of writing. And, you know, when you think about a lot of these article journals, they are really a technical paper that has all these parts that's required. So that's what Dr. Mendes says. If you can figure out the parts and break it up into little chunks, I think it's more doable than trying to do it as a big project one time. So yeah, you know, I would just kind of you know, finding your style, finding your discipline, finding your practices that works for you, and then having conversations with people, whether they have published a lot or they are just starting out, I think can be always very helpful in your own development as a writer and as a researcher. So thank you.
Amazing. On behalf of the group and the Writing Collaborative, Amanda, Edward, thank you for sharing yourselves in this way today. And I've really benefited just from, you know, hearing each of you kind of do this jam session. It's so cool to like see you both share about yourselves and your work. Just for the good of the order for the group, we will close out today.